Hey, how are you? Well, I'm still working on the vanity and it's upstairs getting a few more coats of paint and a few coats of polyurethane on the top. And hopefully Tuesday I'll be delivering and installing that job, and maybe by Tuesday night I'll have a video up on the completion of that project. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is get this section of the barn a lot more organized. So what I want to do is build a plywood bin, and I guess the first step is to just get all of this stuff out of here. So here's a little tip if you work by yourself. This is a piece of 3/4 inch plywood that's attached to the wall. I removed all of the screws except for the one in the center, and so it's got a decent amount of weight to it. And if I remove this screw, then I'm going to have to try to hold this piece of plywood at the same time. So I've taken 2 screws and I've screwed them into studs on each side, so when I remove this screw, these screws will hold the weight, and these are just in studs and the plywood should rest on it. So let's see how it goes. Okay, you see how it's just hanging right there on these screws over here? And now I'll just remove the screws. Well, yesterday I cleaned the corner out and painted the wall. I had to attach a 3/4 inch piece of plywood to the ceiling so I could tie the racks into it and move the light fixture. I also made a couple of the racks. I still need to make one more of the racks. So let's go ahead and make that now, and then we'll start to figure out how we're going to space them. I'm building the racks with 1x4 poplar, and I know I've said this before, but 1x4 is actually 3/4 by 3.5. So if you go to the lumberyard and ask for 1x4, you're going to get boards that measure 3/4 by 3.5. I'm building the racks using pocket holes, and I'll attach the racks to the floor and to the ceiling also using pocket holes. Before I build the frame, I'll drill the pocket holes that will attach the rack to the floor and the ceiling first. My ceiling isn't tall enough, so I'll need to put the pocket hole jig on the floor to drill the holes for building the rack. I've been making all of the racks or the frames just a little bit heavy, and that's because the ceiling drops down about 1/4 inch towards the back. So the total length of the frame is 96 3/4. So I've been measuring up to 96.5, marking a line, and then coming over to the front of the frame and marking another line right at just about 1/16 of an inch, and then connecting those lines with the straight line rip jig for the circular saw. All right, well now I've got all of the racks in place, but I'm not going to tie them to the ceiling or the floor yet because I'm going to add a few dividers to double the space. So on this more narrow or shallow rack on the end here, or the inside, I'll put a divider about 50 inches up so I can get a half sheet at the bottom and the cutoff up top, whatever the random size might be. And I'll add a divider to one of these also. I'll use this piece of plywood that I removed from the wall earlier to make the dividers. This is Baltic birch plywood. It's a really strong plywood and it will be perfect for that. Well, the camera ran out of battery during that last shot, so let me explain what I'm doing. Basically, whenever I need thin pieces of plywood, but I only have big pieces of plywood around, I'll measure the offcut so it's a little bit heavier than what I need and make my first rip, and that way all of the weight of the larger, heavier piece of plywood is supported by the table. So now I can put this piece of plywood away and I'll take this and rip my 2 strips at 3.5 inches. It's just a lot safer and a lot more comfortable. Okay, well now that I've got the plywood bin, I should be able to clean up this wall in no time. Well, I think this is going to work out great, and it'll be really nice to have this wall cleaned up. I think maybe I'll bring my joiner in from the basement and set it up on this wall. I'm going to add to the plywood rack. I don't know when I'm going to do that, but I think that this section here is really usable, and maybe even this section above the fan. I don't know when I'll get to it, but it's definitely on the list. I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.